Our next guest has spent years looking into Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Thiel, and the deep state mafia that actually runs our government. Many people don't want to hear about it. And certainly the corporate media over the past few days that's been covering the RNC has been totally silent on this issue. It's actually pretty telling. Our next guest is Whitney Webb. She is that journalist. In fact, she's just published a brand new piece on Peter Thiel and his connections to all of this money that is flowing into this uniparty. And Whitney joins us today. Whitney, great to see you as always.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back, Clayton.
My pleasure. And, it's interesting over the past few days to watch the corporate media cover the RNC. They all have booths there in Milwaukee. They're all glad-handing with all of the different Republicans who are there walking through the halls. They have them on their air. Everyone from Sean Hannity is like, hey, come on over here, Ron DeSantis, sit down and talk with us. And so there's a lot of real coziness between the journalists who are there in that room and the politicians. There's very little daylight at all, any actual journalism that's actually happening there at the RNC right now. First of all, does that surprise you at all?
Honestly, not at all. Mainstream media, if you look at their coverage and when they give interviews at places like the World Economic Forum at Davos too, there's a kind of coziness there. And when they're trying to secure exclusive interviews with the biggest figures at the RNC, which obviously is going to attract a lot more, attention right now because the Democrat campaign and, Biden's potential to resign, it's essentially like in free fall. I think you're having a renewed focus there, especially because everything that's happening there and with the recent attempt on Trump's life over the weekend is going to essentially, in my opinion, lead many people in mainstream media to believe, and I don't think it's wrong either, that Trump is, the most likely victor in November. So getting back on the good side of the RNC is definitely going to be on the mind of mainstream media. Because a lot of, their success, I guess you could say, in getting exclusive interviews and stories is all related to access, particularly to whichever side of the two-party system is in power at that point in time. So, not that shocking. Yeah, not that shocking to see the media just really in lockstep there. So very little critical reporting going on there. And this is one story that I'm surprised the mainstream media is ignoring, which is the amount of money that's now flowing. Where is it coming from? And the sort of the dark side of all of this. So you've got this new piece out on Peter Thiel. You've been covering him for many, many years and his relationship here with all of these billions of dollars that are flowing now into the Republican Party. Can you talk about who is Peter Thiel? Why are we now focusing on him, given the fact that J.D. Vance has been elevated to the vice presidential nominee status? Right. So the reason that Thiel has entered the conversation is largely due to the fact that he is responsible not only for J.D. Vance's political career and political success, but also for his previous career as a venture capitalist. They first met when Vance was attending Yale Law School, I believe. And he listened to a talk that Peter Thiel gave, and then a few years after graduating law school, was recruited to join one of the investment firms that Thiel co-founded called Mithril Capital, and was there for a few years, and then later joined some other prominent VC firms, for example, one tied to AOL co-founder Steve Case, running the Rise of the Rest Fund there with him. Which was received donors from, some of their biggest donors of that particular fund were people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and also the Walton family of Walmart, which, if you're familiar with them, have very extensive ties to Hillary Clinton and the Clinton family in general. And subsequently, decided to run for office and received $15 million in donations from Peter Thiel for his successful Senate campaign. And, Vance, as people have noted since his nomination, was originally, when he hit the campaign trail initially, a never-Trumper. And his entry back into Trump's good graces was directly facilitated by Peter Thiel, who was a major donor to Trump's first campaign and very influential on his transition team during his first term. And so Peter Thiel has, I would argue, rightly been noted as sort of the guiding hand behind Vance. And upon the announcement that Vance would serve as Trump's VP over the weekend, Peter Thiel, as well as a lot of people involved with the so-called PayPal mafia, which again, Peter Thiel is a PayPal co-founder, you have Elon Musk and David Sachs, for example, in that particular network. They announced that they were going to be heavy donors to the Trump campaign, as did Palantir Technologies, which is a company co-founded by Peter Thiel, as well as another co-founder of Palantir with close ties to Peter Thiel, Joe Lonsdale. So a lot of this money from this particular Thiel network has started flowing into a multi-million-dollar a month super PAC with some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley venture capital and Silicon Valley in general.
So what is Palantir, for those of our viewers who don't know what Palantir is and maybe why we should be concerned about it? I mean, like, oh, money flows in politics all the time. Why should we be concerned about this? $45 million, yes, though, flowing into the Trump campaign. What are they hoping to achieve with that money? You don't just put that money up and just you're happy about it. Like you hope for an outcome, right? You hope for an outcome. What is the outcome?
Well, there's a very long answer to what Palantir is and a short answer, and I'd like to give you both, but we'll start off with the short answer. Essentially, Palantir is the CIA-funded company that labels Americans based on their online activity as subversives for the CIA. So it's poised to have a major role at the center of the coming war on domestic terror. And if you're familiar with how the war on domestic terror has developed across the several last administrations, really since the creation of DHS under the George W. Bush administration, the framework for the war on domestic terror, including that released by the Biden administration a few years ago, makes it very clear that the war on domestic terror is meant to target dissent on the left as well as the right, namely Americans who protest perceived government overreach or who oppose any forms of capitalism, including stakeholder capitalism, the favorite forward of capitalism of the World Economic Forum, for example. And unfortunately, this was an agenda that was launched that has been advanced not just by the Biden administration, but the Trump administration as well, and the Obama administration before that, and of course, the Bush administration before that. It's a bipartisan agenda.
Uniparty.
And Palantir
the Uniparty.
Exactly. And Palantir has advanced it has just been the contractor of choice for that across every administration. It doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. So one example I would give on the other side of things, the Democrat side, is that people may know that Biden's top intelligence official since he came to office is Avril Haines, who was John Brennan's deputy at the CIA under the Obama administration, and also a figure in the Event 201 a pandemic simulation in 2019. And Avril Haines is also a longtime consultant to Palantir, right? So they actively cultivate powerful people on both sides of the political aisle. And while Peter Thiel, is definitely, it frames himself as right-leaning or libertarian, his co-founder at Palantir and the current CEO, Alex Karp, often brags about stopping the rise of the quote-unquote far right in Europe, and has described that a lot of his decisions at the company at Palantir are propelled by a deep-seated fear that he's going to be murdered by Christian conservatives in the United States. So this is definitely a company that goes across both sides and is part of this bipartisan agenda to target both left and right. And so as far as the long answer goes, it's important to understand the history of Palantir and where it came from. It's really the privatization of a mass surveillance apparatus that was developed by the Bush and Reagan neocons going back to the 1980s. Some people that are familiar with the Iran-Contra scandal of the 1980s, and particularly those hearings, there was a question asked by a senator or congressman, I can't remember who, about the continuity of government protocols to Oliver North. And the hearing was subsequently shut down, preventing North from even having to answer the question or even say no comment or plead the fifth or anything like that. And essentially, the continuity of government protocols involved a database of Americans that was called MainCore that was developed with the PROMIS software. And what MainCore was a database of Americans who were deemed unfriendly by the federal government and could be incarcerated at a time of national crisis. And according to the documentation of what could be, considered a national crisis, internal unrest, mass dissent, nonviolent dissent, mind you, against a U.S. military intervention abroad. So a massive nonviolent protest, for example, against the U.S. invasion of a foreign country, for example, could trigger this. Among many other things, a pandemic, a financial crisis. because remember, in the 2008 financial crisis, there were talks of imposing martial law on the United States. So this database actually never went away. It was seen being used during September 11th, 2001 in the White House. The last time it was reported by mainstream media was in a now defunct outlet called Radar. And at that time in 2008, 3 million Americans were on the list. Americans do not know if they are on the list, but presumably it still exists. And Palantir, since it was created, has been one of the, is essentially the software that determines if you are on that list or not for the government, because it is a data mining firm, or, it provides software that turns these masses of data that the NSA and all these other intelligence agencies, all this data that it sucks up on Americans through this warrantless surveillance program, it turns all of that into actionable intelligence and basically essentially profiles Americans. And this particular group that developed MainCore, after 9/11 happened, they tried in direct conjunction with the CIA, created a program that was later scrapped, defunded by Congress, called Total Information Awareness. And Total Information Awareness was going to be read by the man that's been considered the godfather of modern surveillance, John Poindexter, best known for being Reagan's national security advisor during Iran-Contra, and the person that was found guilty of who was charged in connection with Iran-Contra, the highest ranking member of the Reagan administration. And so he was going to be in charge of this program that was going to, again, the whole ethos of it was to prevent terrorist attacks, pandemics, bioterrorism events before they can happen. So this is in the wake, again, of 9/11 and the anthrax attacks of 2001. And essentially what they were hoping to do was get all this data, not just of like what Americans were doing online, but their shopping habits, what they were buying, what they were spending their money on, and their healthcare data. And over time, Palantir has essentially become all of that. And that's why we saw during COVID-19, particularly during the Trump administration, became the contractor of choice for harvesting and analyzing COVID-19 health data, and was also it was also used by Operation Warp Speed to determine which priority populations were going to get which vaccines and how many. And a lot of that data involves sensitive health data of Americans, demographic data, and I argued in a series I did at the time called Warp Speed and Race that it was particularly motivated to target minority communities at that point in time with the COVID-19 vaccine. So Palantir is really a company that a lot of people need to know a lot more about. And it's very unsettling, in my opinion, that it's directly donating so much money to the Trump campaign, and that two of its co-founders are also doing that. And Palantir, again, is not the only unsettling a Thiel-backed company that is involved with essentially developing this pre-crime apparatus. In addition, when Palantir was first created, they were created with funding from In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm, and their only client until 2008 was the CIA. And according to CEO Alex Karp, the CIA was always the intended client of Palantir. Their engineers made over 200 visits to Langley CIA headquarters in their first few years as a company. So the ties with the CIA and Palantir are really as deep as you can get.
So a lot of Americans probably have no idea about this. Those hardworking Americans who go out to a Trump rally, who think that, get your government out of my life, do not tread on me, don't tell me what to do, don't realize that a lot of the money that's flowing into the Republican Party is coming from an apparatus which wants to spy on them, which actually thinks a lot of these Trump supporters, these MAGA supporters who've been labeled as subversives, and they think, oh, Trump's going to protect us from that. No, there's a lot of money actually flowing into the Republican Party from an apparatus which actually believes they are bad people, essentially, right? They're actually supporting an apparatus which actually labels them as subversives. Am I wrong about that?
You're not, actually. One of these Thiel-funded and backed companies that's become a military intelligence contractor, like Clearview AI, which has scraped photos of essentially everyone in the world off of the internet, most of it off of Facebook, which, again, would not exist without the early investment of Peter Thiel. They brag about their role in identifying people that were present at January 6th and helping law enforcement prosecute people who were there. All of whom, of course, are Trump supporters. And after January
Right.
6th, they saw a 26% uptake of their services by law enforcement and used it as a selling point, the fact that they were able to identify Trump supporters so quickly based on their facial recognition database.
This is unbelievable to me. So literally there's support. I mean, yes. So they're really supporting the people that are hurting them. I mean, the Trump supporters should...
I would argue, yes.
I mean, they should be demanding from President Trump. And this is the thing. I don't know if President Trump even knows this. I mean, this is such a nuanced discussion here. I'm not sure that he's even maybe aware of this. Maybe we should give him the benefit of the doubt in this. I mean, I don't know how much he knows about the inner workings of Palantir and Peter Thiel. And maybe Trump supporters should demand that President Trump, say, well, I don't want your money. Keep this out. This is exactly hurting the very people that I'm standing here trying to support, maybe. Right. I mean, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I'm not going to comment on what President Trump or former President Trump does or does not know. I'm obviously not privy to that information. But what I will say, and the reason I brought up total information awareness earlier, is because Bush-era neocons, namely Richard Pearl, one of the architects of the Iraq War, who served in the Bush Department of Defense and who has extremely close ties to Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, he is the person that helped connect Peter Thiel and Alex Karp as they were creating Palantir with John Poindexter, with the explicit purpose of recreating total information awareness as a private enterprise. And since then, the people that have backed that have been the establishment wings of both parties. So regardless of whether Trump knows or he doesn't, there's certainly people around him or who are likely to be in his cabinet that are aware of what Palantir does, because it's a very old agenda that, here I point out how it goes back to the Reagan-Bush era. But you could really make an argument, as Yasha Levine does in his book Surveillance Valley, that the internet's earliest days, going back to when it was a military project called ARPANET, were about counterinsurgency and identifying people who might be a threat to the status quo through their activity on this particular network and through data mining. Which is something to be considered, because if you look back at, the policy of domestic terror, for example, during the Clinton administration, there was a focus on veterans, a focus on militias, and in general, the domestic terror apparatus tends to be pointed at Americans who care about the Constitution, who care about reining in the surveillance state, who care about preventing tyranny, who care about ensuring privacy and freedom for not just for themselves, but for future generations. And, by and large, a lot of that tends to fall sort of in right-leaning segments of the population. And I think people should be very unsettled by this, especially when you consider that Peter Thiel is one of the main investors in Rumble, for example. How does Rumble use user data? Does this surveillance apparatus that includes Palantir profile people that use Rumble? It's very possible, if they have a financial incentive to do so, through Peter Thiel. And I think it would be nice to ask clarity from Rumble leadership if they provide user data to U.S. intelligence or if they sell it in any capacity, because also U.S. intelligence doesn't just take it illegally, they also buy our data, because data is, the main commodity of the modern world. A lot of people have been saying for a few years that data is the new oil. And one of the reasons our intelligence services want all of this data on us so badly is to profile us, which again is precisely what Palantir does for them. And again, they claim that they prevent terror attacks before they happen and all of this crime before it happens. But Palantir is also a pioneer of what they call predictive policing, which is essentially pre-crime. And pre-crime is something that was actually legalized under the Trump administration. It was Attorney General William Barr who created a program at the DOJ called DEEP, which is an early engagement program, they say, for people who are believed to be mobilizing toward violence. And this all came in the wake of the El Paso Walmart shooting. I think that was 2019 or so. And at that time, then President Trump demanded, or rather called for, big tech companies to develop software to identify shooters before they could commit, mass shootings. And he actually considered a proposal that was brought to him by his friend, former president of NBC Universal, Bob Wright, and was lobbied to him heavily by his own daughter, Ivanka Trump. For a agency called HARPA, which Biden actually created, but they call it ARPA-H. And the flagship program of HARPA was to be this program called Safe Homes, where they would monitor not just Americans' social media data, but also data sucked up by Fitbits, Apple TVs, the Alexa device from Amazon, all of these things in your home, and use that, run it through an AI algorithm and determine if you show any early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence. With the potential to have you go and attend sessions with a court-ordered physician, and could also lead to your house arrest. All sorts of things were under this proposal. And Trump was allegedly sold on it, according to reports at the time, but it didn't actually end up materializing. Maybe he, someone talked some sense into him, but it certainly wasn't Ivanka Trump, who was the biggest lobbyist for this in his administration. But given the outsized role we're seeing now from Palantir and big tech in funding his campaign, I think there's definite cause for concern there that something like that could resurrect itself, especially considering that a lot of money has been put into this pre-crime apparatus. And actually, there's another company that Peter Thiel funded that's involved with developing this pre-crime system in the United States by actually taking over county by county the nation's 911 emergency call systems. This is an Israeli founded company called Carbine 911. That was nominally headed for a long time by Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. Jeffrey Epstein funded it with $1 million. Allegedly, Leslie Wexner, his biggest patron, did as well. And it used to have, until the Epstein connection to the company was reported, had the former head of Israeli intelligence unit 8200 on its board of directors. Another Epstein associate named Nicole Junkerman used to be on the board, among others. And they have since left, but other people have joined the board, like former head of DHS under Trump, Christian Nielsen, as well as Michael Chertoff. And Peter Thiel's Founders Fund gave a significant amount of money to this company as well. And so a close Thiel associate who served in the transition team, particularly for the Pentagon of the Trump administration the first time, Trace Stevens, has also served on its board, including when it was openly affiliated with Israeli intelligence and to the present as well. And Carbine 911, what it does.
Can I just ask you, because this past week, USA Today reported that we've had now 8 major outages of the 911 network in the United States. This is a huge concern. I mean, as we head into this election, a lot of people saying, well, could we see some sort of, big national emergency? And now 911 networks are going down across the United States, as the USA Today reported this past week. So
yes.
Is this like an effort for them to say, hey, your 911 network is down? Well, we have the perfect solution for you. It's an Israeli-backed 911 network.
That is essentially what is happening. And it's actually been in the works for several years. For several years now, there has been a lobbying effort to replace the current 911 call center system in the U.S., which is decentralized and, more or less based on each county, to make it a new national federal system called Next Generation, or NG 911. And Carbine 911, since it was created, has become extremely close with the main lobbying group for NG 911 and is slated to be the vendor of choice if and when legislation for Next Generation 911 is pushed through. And again, with major people in DHS, major people with ties not just to the Trump administration, but to Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, and also another Thiel-backed military contractor now building the virtual border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, Anduril. It's very likely that Carbine 911 would be slated for, preferential treatment going forward. But what's the problem with Carbine 911? Well, according to earlier reports, before they sort of scrubbed major aspects of their website after their connection to Jeffrey Epstein was made public, when you call a 911 call center running Carbine on a smartphone, it can harvest pretty much everything you have on your phone off of it and store it on their database. And they use that database not just to, assess what is going on in the moment or whatever, but they can also use whatever data points they find relevant on your phone to determine, to feed into an algorithm that determines where crime may happen in the future and what crime hotspots may emerge over the coming weeks or months, right? So this is essentially another component of the pre-crime system. And Carbine has also talked about how they plan to be functional in smart cities, where in the future, people won't be calling 911 smart devices on the street, like street lights and other, facial recognition cameras and things like that would be able to notify 911 without a human even being involved in calling and reporting an emergency. So this is a very Orwellian company. Obviously, the people funding it, in my opinion, probably are not to be trusted if you consider what I said earlier about Peter Thiel's involvement with Palantir, his efforts to privatize TIA, and then later create Facebook, which was essentially launched the same day that another DARPA program called LifeLog that does exactly what Facebook does was shut down. And then Facebook comes back in its place, and its first major investor that puts it on the map is Peter Thiel, and it's collected all of this data about our lives that it shares with our government. And also, it's just complete madness. All these people have been building a panopticon, and we've been freely giving them our data for a very, very long time. And they've been using it to profile us. And this is why, personally, it irks me a lot when people try and say that Peter Thiel is a libertarian. Certainly he claims that publicly in his speeches and books, says certain things. But if you look at his actions and what he has done, creating a tool like Palantir for the federal government is literally the least libertarian thing you could do. Nothing empowers the worst aspects of the state more than a company like Palantir. And
you have to imagine all of these Trump supporters who were at the rally on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania. It's curious to me how many of those Trump supporters were there who, when they were filing their emails back and forth and getting their information about arriving at the rally, no bags, or here's the list of information from the Trump campaign. How many of those people have been profiled and are now in a database that is backed by Palantir in some capacity, and they have no idea that they're probably labeled as such. And it's mind-boggling to me. So all of these Trump supporters go in to support President Trump. They don't realize that in the back end, the money that's flowing in has been monitoring them and surveilling them and basically labeling them as subversives to the United States.
Yeah, well, again, we don't know the metrics that the Palantir or intelligence agencies use to determine who is a subversive and who isn't. But if in 2008 it had 3 million Americans on it, I can assure you that now in 2024 it is much larger, considering the amount of data that has been sucked up since then and everything that has happened in this country since that time. And so what really concerns me here is that people, again, are believing that this is, Trump is poised to fight the deep state in his second term. But why is he inviting these people in as donors? And not only that, considering people like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, who helped fleece Americans' wealth during the 2008 financial crisis, and have him be Treasury Secretary. The fact that he would even consider that is frankly very disturbing. And, I think, again, part of it goes back to efforts to sort of define the deep state as a Democrat-only entity. But again, the deep state refers to, at least in my opinion, the unelected officials that serve between administrations in the government, and, sort of like the unelected bureaucracy. And, as we've seen, throughout American history, they run every administration, whether it's Democrat or Republican. And in the case of Trump, he had a first term. We can see what his policy record was. Did he stand up to the deep state on things like COVID or mass shootings or red flag laws and things like that? And I think people should go back and consider the policies and not get so wrapped up in the momentum, perhaps, of political campaigns, because political campaigns are sales pitches. But as we've seen throughout American history, presidents do not keep their campaign promises. If they do, they keep very few. Unfortunately, the stakes are very high in this country. I don't think people can really continue to vote for the lesser of two evils indefinitely when they ultimately are beholden to this same system that is building this bipartisan surveillance state. And what especially concerns me, too, is that some of Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail this time around is him calling for things like a biometric U.S. entry-exit system. So you'll have to scan your face to either cross the border or fly into an airport or travel internationally. And this is actually something that comes from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030. And that's why it's being rolled out across the world in South America, the EU, the UK, between this year and next year. So why is he promoting that? Why are campaign lawyers of his promoting the idea of using biometric digital ID to vote? Why can't we use physical IDs? to vote. Do we really need to give in to the digital agenda to save, to resolve these problems in the United States? I don't really think that's true. And I think, again, this speaks to the influence of big tech on our politics. Keep in mind also that, one of the main big tech barons behind Biden is Eric Schmidt. And Eric Schmidt serves on the steering committee of Bilderberg alongside Peter Thiel. And Bilderberg is a closed-door globalist meeting where, people like the chairman of the World Economic Forum and all of these people come together to chart out essentially the course of global events over the following year. You have Peter Thiel, a Republican donor, and Eric Schmidt, a Democrat donor, all on the steering committee. And according to a 2019 Newsweek article, they're the most influential people there, Thiel and Schmidt. So again, the Uniparty agrees on a lot more than it does not. And I think we should look at this surveillance agenda very seriously. And, maybe this information is unsettling for people, as it rightly should be. But the answer to this is very simple. We need to start starving these big tech barons of our data and stop letting them harvest our stuff. And also, you let them manipulate us through the psychological operations we know they're conducting online, because the deep state, right? The military and intelligence communities are on record have been funding have put millions of dollars into using bots and other tools to manipulate online discourse. One U.S. Air Force proposal for that exact purpose said that they were researching in 2014 how to use social media to control people like drones. Like unmanned drones, right? So, this is the type of research that the deep state has been putting in to manipulating Americans' behavior online. And if, the deep state doesn't like Americans that want to protest against government overreach or want to protect the Constitution, people should be very vigilant, not just about how their data is being used and what they're saying online, but, pretty much every interaction they have, with the online space, including how information they consume impacts them. Keep in mind that Elon Musk is a Pentagon contractor. Would he tell the Pentagon that they can't use the tools they've developed for PSYOPs over the past several years that they've poured millions and millions of dollars into? Would he tell them no when he also relies on Pentagon contracts for the success of his company, SpaceX, for example? I think these questions should be asked. Quite frankly. And, not that I want to tell people not to follow news between now and November, but I think, whoever wants to feel more sane between now and November, you might want to be responsible about the information you consume and how much time you're spending online. And it's also possible, again, to cultivate a news feed without using social media. A lot of people have forgotten about RSS feeds. You can put in the websites or URLs of your favorite sites and shows like Redacted and build your own news feed that social media cannot manipulate. And that may be something very important to rely on as we get closer to November. But again, I've been ranting for a while. Sorry.
No, that's what I do. I use an app on my iPad, my Mac called Reader, and it's an RSS reader. And I'm subscribed to specific news sources that I know are not part of the deep state agenda, and who I can get reliable information from, like Unlimited Hangout, your website, and others. And I read it every day. And I think if people are just like tuning into Apple News or Google News, or they get their sources like from Yahoo News, CNN, etc., they're of course being fed a steady stream of propaganda that they need to be aware of heading into this election.